you know? Yeah, it's a crazy week ahead of us. Tomorrow, Dawn and I head to Rapid City for district conference. I'm also preaching out there at a camp service. We get back next Saturday, we load the truck. Sunday, I preached 3 times at the Bridge Church. I'm not sure why I agreed to that. And then a week from tomorrow, we head south. And we bought a place just south of the Kansas City area. I don't know how it happened. All of our kids and grandkids settled on the south side of Kansas City within 20 minutes of each other. And so I don't really like my kids that well, but the grandkids, you understand that, right? Yeah. So anyway, it's been an amazing thing. God called Dawn and I to the Iowa, Minnesota district 16 years ago. And about that same time, God was laying his hand on a young church planter named John West. He was in Texas. We even had a phone conversation or two as we were both in the decision process, and we may or may not have had a, if you'll move, I will, conversation. It had been a long, long time since the Iowa, Minnesota district had a successful church plant. And God called John here. I'm looking around, and there's still a bunch of core group members from that group that came from Grace Wesleyan. And here's the thing. It's like you guys broke through a ceiling for us. Prior to Radiant, there was, I don't know, it had been so long since we had a church plant. Since Radiant, we have now planted 10 more churches. And yeah, it's just kind of like God used you to break through a ceiling and give us faith that, yeah, we can do this. We can start new works. A few of them I'll just talk about just for a minute before we get into the message. Well, obviously, Presence Church, right? You're very, very well aware of that. And Ben Mueller is building his core group. They're looking toward a fall launch. We have a brand new church being planted in the Twin Cities area, which is a big deal. We've been wanting to impact the Twin Cities. A young man named Brandon Fleeman, he'd been on staff at one of our churches up there and has a heart for lost people. And you ready for this? The name of this new church is Sinners Church. Yeah, that works, you know. And then one of the most exciting stories, just the first week of January, we launched a brand new church in Mason City, Iowa. It's called One Church. An amazing, amazing story there. First Christian church, an old mainline denomination that had been in that area for years and years. Their congregation dwindled. They were about to close. They contacted us. They heard we were coming to town. Anyway, the short of it is that they donated their building to us. And they said this is a way for us to live on. It gets a little better. They said, we've also accumulated some funds over the years. Now, if you saw the building, you know how they accumulated the funds by not taking care of the building. But along with the building, they presented us with a check of $200,000. And of course, gave us the money to renovate the building. We launched with 190 people on January the 6th. And it's just has gone from there. I mean, I'm excited about worship numbers, but here's a better number. So far, they've baptized 27 people in this brand new church. So anyway, I share all that just to say, you kind of help set the table for that. So thank you. And now let's talk about what God's laid on my heart to share with you today. Scripture uses a variety of metaphors to describe the life of the disciple, the Christian life. Spiritual warfare is one, right? In Ephesians, Paul talks about that. And If you served Jesus very long, you know we're in a battle. That one fits. The family of God is one. Building on a firm foundation is another one. Remember, Jesus told that parable in Matthew 7. A tree and its fruit, but one of my favorite metaphors for the Christian life, for what it means to walk with Jesus, is the metaphor of a race. The Apostle Paul uses that metaphor, of course, in 2 Timothy. You've all heard that verse used in funerals. Maybe we should have read that at the end of Jason's thing for me. Remember when he said, I've finished the race? Remember that deal? I've fought the good fight. I finished the race. The Hebrew writer also uses that analogy, and we'll bring it up on the screen here in Hebrews 12:1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Now, if I was going to preach a sermon from that, which I'm not, there'd be an easy 4-point outline. The first one being that the race is really important because people are watching. Another one is that if we're going to run this race, we have to throw off the stuff that would encumber us. That's point 2. Point 3 would be that we have to run it with perseverance because it's a long race. It's a hard race. And point 4 would be that we have to run the race marked out for us. We don't get to choose our own race. So there you go. Maddie, there's an outline. Preach the message. When our youngest son, Luke, who many of you know, he served here for a while. When he was a junior in high school, he came home and announced to us that he was going to go out for cross country. Now, this was new to us. We're a family of basketball players. And so Dawn and I had been to lots and lots of basketball games, but knew nothing about cross country. So we went to our first meet, not sure what to expect or how even to watch a cross-country meet, and friends of ours took us under their wing and said, just stay with us. And so we were at the starting line, and there were scores of boys. And when the gun fired, they took off like a shot. And for the first couple of 100 yards, they all looked like champions. You know where I'm going with this, don't you? Our friend said, okay, come over here. There's the halfway point of the course. And at the halfway point, the runners were spread out. And some were still running with strength, and others, you could tell, were having a hard time of it. I won't tell you where Luke ranked in that line. Now we went to the finish line, and here's the deal. The finish line told the tale. See, the finish line, it was easy to see who had been putting in miles during the summer, who had been training, who had been taking it seriously. And some runners crossed with strength and wow. And others crossed barely. So I thought to myself that day, boy, here's an analogy. I thought, this will preach. You know, preachers always look at everything that way, right? You know, with this. Or as we used to say in Oklahoma, that dog will hunt. And the thought occurred to me that day that how you start a race isn't nearly as important as how you finish it, right? It's true in a race, but boy, it's true in life, and it's true in so many areas. How about marriage? It's not hard to have a great wedding, but a great marriage? That's a little different deal, isn't it? You know, it's like one guy said. He said, you know, when we were first married, we were so happy. But then as we were leaving the church, your health, boy, I'm going to get in shape. I'm going to start eating right. I'm going to exercise. Ever notice how full the gyms are the first 2 weeks of January? It's easy to start. Obviously, if a church is to remain strong and effective over the years, boy, it's a hard race. That's a hard race. There are difficult seasons that have to be faced, right? More importantly, in our walk with Jesus, boy, it's not hard to begin this life of discipleship with a burst of enthusiasm, is it? Isn't it? It's like, my sins are forgiven. This is the greatest thing. Let's look down the road a few years. How you doing? How you doing? So the truths we're going to explore today, the title of the message is When the Race Gets Hard. And how many of you know that sometimes the race gets hard? You apply it where you need to apply it. You might be facing a really, really difficult season in your marriage where it'd be easier to run than rebuild. You might be facing a health challenge. Like me, you could be a senior citizen. And boy, that's been a party. You know, and I will just share this. I'll confess. I'll confess for all of us senior citizens. You want to know what one of the biggest temptations is? The temptation to coast. That I did my deal, I ran my race. You could be praying for the salvation of a friend or a family member, and it just doesn't seem like they're getting any closer to Jesus. Okay, so you get the idea. You apply these truths to wherever you need to. Now today we're going to look at one of my heroes in the Bible, whose race took an unexpected and quite frankly unfair turn when he was about 40. And his race got really, really long, and his race got really, really hard. You can read the whole story in Numbers 13 and 14, but here's the backdrop. You remember two guys named Joshua and Caleb? God had delivered Israel from slavery in Egypt, and he'd led them the whole party in the Red Sea, and it was just amazing. They got to the edge of the long-awaited promised land, and they decided it'd be a good idea to send in spies. Let's not go in here blind. Let's check this out. And so they selected 12 guys, one from each of the 12 tribes. And they went over and they explored. And if you remember the story, they came back and they said, wow, this is better even than we thought. The land really does flow with milk and honey. They brought some of the fruit back and they said, it's incredible. But 10 of them said, we can't do it. It's going to be too hard. They have giants over there. It's too risky. Joshua and Caleb, though, said, we have to do it. We didn't come this far just to be on a camping trip. There's a destination we're trying to reach, but the majority won the argument, and here's what happened in Numbers 14. God says, as surely as I live, and as surely as the glory of the Lord fills the whole earth, not one of the men who saw my glory and the miraculous signs that I performed in Egypt and in the desert, but who disobeyed me and tested me 10 times. Not one of them will ever see the land I promised on oath to their forefathers. No one who has treated me with contempt will ever see it. But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I'll bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. Because my servant Caleb has a different spirit, he's still going to get to go into the promised land. Not now, Not when he thought he would, but he's going to get there. To use the race analogy, what was it about Caleb that helped him run with perseverance the race when it got really, really hard? We're going to go to Joshua 14, starting in verse 6, and I just want to pull out a laundry list of qualities that I see in Caleb. Joshua 14, 6 through 7. Now the men of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal. This is 4 decades later, okay? After wandering in the wilderness. Approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land." We'll see later he is now 85. 45 years have passed. And he points to that and he says, I was 40 and God promised me. And I've been clinging to that promise. So here's the first thing that I see in him is the quality of patience. Patience set him apart. Caleb remembered a promise that God had made all of those years earlier, and he waited, and he waited, and he waited. Here's the thing. We all have disappointments in life that put us in the waiting room. Is that true? Sure it is. And as we're waiting for God to move, as we're waiting for the situation to change, some people just get more impatient, more demanding, more irritable. And they turn into that, hey, get off my lawn guy. You know anybody like that? Are you like that? Other people, it just seems like they grow stronger and more resilient. It's like, wow. Here's the key. The key to Caleb's patience and the key to yours and mine is the promise of God. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Caleb could have just shriveled up from disappointment, from being turned away from the promised land. By the way, wasn't even his fault. He was ready to do the right thing 45 years earlier. He got caught in the crossfire of other people's unbelief. He could have just shriveled up and said, fine, forget it. But he didn't, because he knew that God would get the last word. Okay, so patience. Let's go on, verses 7 and 8. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my brothers who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt with fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Second thing I see in him is the quality of courage. Key in on the word convictions. While the other guys were melting with fear, and it doesn't necessarily mean that Caleb didn't feel fear. But he pushed ahead. Why? He said, because of my convictions. Andy Stanley defined courage like this. I love this. I keep coming back to this. He said, courage is clarity around an unreasonable commitment to what should be. I love that. Caleb had clarity. First of all, he knew why they were on the banks of the Jordan 45 years earlier. It wasn't a camping trip. We have clarity that God is leading us to the promised land. But then he also had this crazy, unreasonable commitment to it. An unreasonable commitment that kept him running the race for another 45 years. 10 of the spies earlier were saying, we can't do this. There are giants over there. Let's be reasonable, shall we? Caleb and Joshua said, no, I don't think we'll be reasonable. I think we'll trust God. I think we'll bite the bullet and charge the enemy. Here's the thing. The further we are in the race, the more we start thinking about conserving what we have instead of expanding into new territories. Have you noticed that? People do it. I get that. I'm just telling you, it's harder for me to risk these days. You know? It's like I was texting with a couple of my sons a while back, and they were teasing me about who am I going to bet my life savings on in the NFL finals. And I said, nobody, because unlike you two bozos, I actually have a life savings. You know? And if you think about it, that's exactly, okay, let me coach you up here a little bit. 16 years ago, this church did not exist. And I'm just telling you, it was easier to risk then than it is now. You know? It's not hard to risk when you don't have anything. But now you have staff, you have programs, you got this beautiful building you're leasing. And if you aren't careful, listen. If you aren't careful, protecting what you have becomes more important than doing whatever you need to do to make disciples who make disciples. And you get to the point where you're not willing to let go of what is to take hold of what God has for you in the future. That takes courage. So whether we're talking about people or churches, listen to this. Change is a key to continued growth. Change always involves risk, and risk always takes courage. Change is a key to growth. Change requires risk. Risk requires courage. Okay, let's do another one. Verse 9. So on that day, Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So wholehearted commitment is the next one. And that phrase keeps coming up in this story. I've followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly. You know, back to the cross-country race analogy. It wasn't hard to tell who approached the race wholeheartedly and who was on the team just so they could hang out with their friends after school, right? Now, listen, the longer I have lived, the longer I have walked with Jesus, my list of things that I am committed to has grown shorter, not longer. Does that resonate with any of you? You know, 30, 40 years ago, there were a lot of hills I would have been willing to die on. Not anymore. I think hopefully I've discovered what's important, what's not. I think I'm less distracted these days. I think I can commit myself wholeheartedly to what really matters. Jesus, my family, the Great Commission. That's about it. I don't have to be involved in anything and everything. I've learned I can't commit myself to too many things, so let's commit myself to what's important. That's the key to wholeheartedness, right? I don't know if you've ever heard this illustration, but I think it's fantastic. Years ago, there was a time management expert that was invited to do a presentation to a business class in a college. And he showed up with one of those gallon clear glass jars, you know. And he took about 5 fist-sized rocks and he put them in the jar. And he asked the class, "Is the jar full?" And they looked, "Yeah, it looks full." He said, "No, it's not." And he took gravel and he sprinkled it in, and of course the gravel worked its way out around between the crevices of the rocks. He did the same thing with sand, and finally he did it again with water, each time asking the class, "Is the jar full?" When he was done, he asked the class, "What lesson am I trying to teach you?" And some young eager beaver said, "If you're creative enough, you can always fit a little bit more in." And he said, "No, what I'm trying to teach you is that if you don't put in the big rocks first, you don't get them in at all." I think that's a fantastic statement. By the way, that's what the Hebrew writer was talking about when he said, "Throw off everything that hinders." Okay, a couple more. Verse 10, "Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses while Israel moved about in the desert. So here I am today, 85 years old." Fourth quality I see in him that made him a man with a different spirit was his unwavering faith. God made a promise to Caleb, and he never doubted that God would keep his word. Just as the Lord promised, he said. His faith was in the living God. Caleb looked back over God's faithfulness in keeping him alive and well for these 45 years. And it gave him faith for the future. Remember that old hymn, old gospel song, "Count Your Blessings"? I think awareness of God's blessings in the past, for me at least, is a key to faith for the future. I've got this file. It's packed away in a box now somewhere. And I don't keep many files anymore, you know, paper files. Nobody does that. But I have a few, and this is one that I keep. And in it, I have just anything that would remind me of God's faithfulness. You know, notes from people, pictures, whatever. I've started calling it my Ebenezer file. You remember that old hymn, "Come thou fount of every blessing"? That verse, "Here I raise mine Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come." Who knows what an Ebenezer is? 1, 2. Why would you sing a song you don't know what means? No, you can read the whole story back in, 2 Samuel 7, I believe. And Ebenezer means stone of help. It was a memorial that the children of Israel put up. And every time you look at this stone, remember, God helped us. So I call it my Ebenezer file. As I struggle and get discouraged, I'll pull that thing out and just leaf through it a little bit. Oh, yeah. Oh, I forgot about that. Oh, yeah. Okay. We're ready to keep going now. It gives me the courage to keep running. Right? Let's do what? What do I got? One more? One more. We're almost done. We're for sure going to beat the Lutherans to the good restaurants. Sorry, I don't know where that stuff comes from. I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country as the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I'll drive them out just as he said. Final thing is a forward-thinking attitude. I love this. Now, what do you think? He says, I'm still as strong today. How many of you believe that? Nobody. You don't believe the word of God. What is wrong with you people? No, here's the deal. His strength was in his spirit. And yeah, he was as strong. Maybe not physically. But there was a vigor in his spirit. And there was something about him. There was something about him that gave the young warriors courage to go into battle. I love that. I wish I could talk about that for a while. That as we get older, our leadership is as strong as ever, but it's different. I can't go there, sorry. He had become a mentor and a sage, a teacher. And I think there was something about him that gave the young warriors courage to go into battle. That gave the young warriors faith to believe we can do this. We can charge this hill. We can take this. Caleb believes in us. And his role in battles, I am certain, was different than it would have been 45 years earlier. Different, but just as important. So, when the race got tough, he focused on the finish line. At age 85, he spent more time looking through the windshield than he did at the rearview mirror. He wasn't a good old days old guy. He never took his eyes off the finish line. Let's wrap up by going back to our Hebrews passage real quickly. But we're going to read a little farther this time. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Here it is. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so you'll not grow weary and lose heart. There it is. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Jesus, thank you for finishing your race. I wouldn't be in the race if you hadn't finished your race. Jesus, give me the courage to keep running. But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I'll bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. See, and we don't have time to go into this either. There are unborn generations depending on you to run your race. His descendants will inherit it. It's an important race. You can't quit. You just can't. May God give us a different spirit. I want to pray for us, but I'm going to do something that I hadn't planned on. which is always a bit dangerous. I'm guessing that some of you are in kind of a tough season right now. Marriage, health, money, kids who aren't following Jesus. I don't know, anything. But it's a real temptation to get discouraged. And some days you get up and you think to yourself, it wasn't supposed to be this way. And you're tempted to stop running. I want to pray especially for you. And I'm going to ask you as an act of faith just to stand to your feet right now and say, I want to be included in this prayer because my race is pretty tough right now. Anybody want to do that? Just stand to your feet. That's what I thought. These kinds of messages aren't theoretical, are they? Let me pray for you.